5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me point out an important difference between the last Congress and this one. Last Congress under Republican leadership, our #1 priority was tax reform and jobs, putting more money into the pockets of the American people who've earned it. That's why our bill, H.R.1, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, was that first priority. Even back in 1995, the first bill under Republican leadership was the Congressional Accountability Act, to make sure Congress and its staff have to abide by the same rules as the rest of Americans. This Congress, under Democrat leadership, it appears their priorities are much different. Their H.R.1, supposedly their most prized bill, hence they give it the #1 bill, is not a generational policy reform to benefit Americans, but rather politics and rigging elections. That's the Democrat priority. Sweeping federal mandates that institute a 6-to-1 government match for small donor political contributions. That means 6-to-1 your tax dollars going to match contributions made for campaigns. $200 would yield $1,200 from the federal government into a campaign. In what world is it defensible for the federal government to be forced to use your taxpayer funds, you to be forced for your taxpayer dollars, to support a candidate for office, regardless of whether you support that candidate? The bad news, it doesn't end there. Democrats want to take some of the corrupt policies in my own state of California and institute them nationwide. For example, ballot harvesting. Since its implementation in California, this practice has opened up our state to endless potential for election fraud. Just a couple months ago, this exact practice sent one North Carolina election into chaos, with every Democrat in the state demanding a re-election in the North Carolina one, using similar practices. Ironically, this bill is completely silent on ballot harvesting. In fact, Democrats blocked an amendment I worked on to make ballot harvesting illegal in all states, not just where it's convenient for their elections. In Orange County, California, 250,000 provisional ballots were counted after election night, with people delivering hundreds of them at a time. Now, I'm a staunch supporter of ensuring every voter has access to the polls, but this bill isn't about that. This legislation only undermines the security of our election system and limits the already lacking safeguards that are in place to ensure the integrity of our electoral process. How are the voters, the people, the citizens of America supposed to have confidence in their election system when they see these games being played? To make matters worse, this bill will actually weaken voter ID laws. It automatically registers everyone in the DMV database, no questions asked, alive or dead. When this issue has come up in California, we've seen numerous problems in the DMV process. California voter rolls have little integrity. We have tens of thousands of so-called voters that are registered that may not even be eligible, may not even be citizens. This has also, in that process, made the real ID process in California questionable as well, where the people are going to have to get their ID redone in order to be able to use the airports. While some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle like to peg voter ID laws as prohibitive, the Bureau of Economic Research published a study proving that is not the case. We all support easy and fair voter registration, but it has to come with sensible voter protections and fraud prevention safeguards. As we saw in California this past election cycle, thousands of ballots will continue to be harvested even after Election Day. That's a huge problem. If this bill needed another nail in the coffin, even the ACLU has condemned the legislation as unconstitutional. That's because it hurts free speech and attempts to silence those who would dare disagree with, in this case, Democrat priorities. Just a few years ago, a California theater director was forced to resign over harassment due to a political donation, just for advocating for his own beliefs. Democrats boldly dubbed this legislation For the People Act, but a more appropriate title would be Democrat Politicians Protection Act. Once again, H.R.1 under Republican leadership was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and years ago, an Accountability Act. H.R.1 under Democrat leadership is an unconstitutional bill to force Americans to help re-elect more Democrats. That should paint a starkly contrasting picture for the American people what the priorities are of the two parties. I urge opposition to this terrible bill. I yield back.